All right, big show tonight. He wasn't able to join us for our Dynasty mock draft we did a few weeks back, so we had to get him back in the ship chasing saddle. It is, of course, JJ Zachariason, aka the late round QB. He has a terrific draft guide out, and we are going to talk to him about all of his favorite rookies. We're going to lean towards some of those sleepers for your Dynasty drafts and, of course, your best ball drafts. This is Ship Chasing with Pete, Ben, and JJ. Let's do it.
Pat Fryer Helmo.
This is why I'm hot.
Anita Handjob.
Fix your sight.
Jamar Alpha Play Chase.
Are you kidding me? Kadarius Toney?
You can't handle the heat.
Pete, it looks like we're finally this boys. You're right.
All right, JJ on Ship Chasing. What a night. Pat Crane is out, of course. JJ, we were sad to miss you the other week. Welcome back.
I know, man. I know. I feel like that's gonna become like a yearly thing at this point with the little rookie draft. I did tell you guys though that I'm kind of glad that I wasn't on a couple weeks ago because I had to then I guess defend my Hendon Hooker mid second round last year. Glad I didn't have to do that.
The pre-draft rookie picks, we all had a few forgettable ones. It's always the case.
Yeah.
You don't even know landing spot, any of that stuff.
Yeah. It honestly is such it is a really good exercise in general, right? To go back, look at a mock draft you did even after the NFL draft, much less one before last year's NFL draft. And you realize it's just humbling to know how many of these guys we're going to miss on. It's not even just like being right and wrong. It's just like so many of these guys aren't going to hit. And yet it is very fun to tell ourselves the best case scenario for these guys right now.
I took Tank Bigsby in that, and I remember later in the summer there was like a little bit of hype for Bigsby. Obviously, like that was kind of beating down ETN's ADP later in the offseason. And I remember being like, "Yeah, I was on him first." So I remember taking him in the ship chasing thing, and then when we pulled that up, I took Bigsby one pick ahead of Devaughn Achane. And I was stoked about that, like months in the future before the season started. I was like, I nailed that pick.
I will say, at least I had my guy Jaden Reed, I think, in the last pick of that one.
That's
so
right.
that canceled out the Hooker pick a little bit.
And that's, man, there was signal to that Jaden Reed one, and I wish it stuck for me more because I know we had both you and Reeves on for various shows last year around this time, and both of you guys were kind of flag planting Jaden Reed pretty early in the process, and that panned out very well.
Yeah, worked out.
So you got your draft guide out. What's the plan? Is there going to be an update right after the NFL draft? Is that the next big one?
Yeah. So I was telling you guys before we got on that I just finished a half marathon a couple weeks ago, and I'm saying that because I didn't get the time that I wanted, and I wanted to just sign up for a race immediately, like as soon as I could. Not a half, but just something just to get my blood going a little bit. So I signed up for a 10K, and I realized that it's on Sunday morning after the draft is over. And so like 7:30 in the morning on that Sunday, I'm going to run a 10K. And so I have to absolutely get the draft guide update out on Saturday, by Saturday evening. So draft starts Thursday and Saturday. Updates for not all of the guys, because like some of these guys, like I profiled every running back and wide receiver that was at the combine. I'm not gonna, if guys don't get drafted and such, like I'm not gonna update their blurbs or anything, but probably like at least 60-70% of the guys will have new blurbs and like talking about landing spot and all that good stuff. And it'll be out on Saturday night because so many people are then drafting usually that Monday after the draft. They're gonna kick off.
And we've invited you to our draft show the last couple of years, but I remember this now that you say that you haven't been able to do it because you're working on this during, like as it's happening, you're updating this rookie guide because people have rookie drafts. I mean, they start right after the draft ends for a lot of people.
Yeah. Like I've had
immediately.
I've had people like hit me up and be like, "Yo, are you gonna like try to travel to wherever the draft is that given year and stuff?" I'm like, I can't. Like, I gotta get this stuff done and out, or else like I can't be like doing that while I'm like drinking and celebrating these different picks that are going on stage, you know? So yeah, I mean, it's a different experience. I don't mind it. It's fun. Like I get to analyze things quickly, get things out fast, and kind of have like, you know, I'm not someone that's like got to be first in the space with certain takes and stuff like that. but it's nice to kind of get your takes out there before you're influenced by other things that are going on around you.
Well, and I just read your post today, or was it yesterday, talking about like how much does early declare status matter, and you talk about, you know, how you're weighting some of those inputs, and like draft capital is still the biggest, right? Or if not one of the biggest inputs, where it's like you can put this stuff all out, but like the board is going to get reshuffled in a major way based on draft capital alone.
Yeah, especially a running back this year, man. Like the running back group in the class this year, it's like just filled with RB2 types, RB3 types. Like there's just not a Breece Hall type prospect in this class. I mean, maybe Jonathon Brooks could become that, but you know, he's got the ACL that he dealt with in November, that he suffered in November, that he's going to be dealing with, you know, into 2024. And so there's just what that means is that like I have no one really has any idea what kind of draft capital these guys are going to get. And if there's a day 2 guy who kind of comes out of nowhere, he's going to leapfrog a lot of these guys who we think are going to go day 2 and back and forth. It's just going to be a wild time. Because I think we have a general idea of like where a lot of these wide receivers are going to go, just because it's a really good class. A lot of them are getting, a lot of them are mocked at the point to going in like the second round. Like we're going to see like 15 wide receivers the first like 70 picks of this draft. Like it's going to be wild. But running back is just going to be the Wild West.
Is there going to be any? I mean, there's going to be a lot of receivers early and basically no running backs, right? Like, I mean, in the first 70 picks, we could have a couple, maybe.
I think you're hoping for Dallas to take one at 56, and that could be the Brooks landing spot. I mean, maybe it's Trey Benson, but yeah, I mean, there's this like, you know, there are definitely teams out there that sort of need running back, but I think that we're, you know, in this era / you know, just this time of where teams are just not valuing the position, understandably so. And then you layer on top of that, it's not like I think a lot of people say this is a bad running back class. I don't think it's really a bad running back class per se. I just don't. I think that people judge that based on how much high end talent there is. I think there's a lot of, again, like RB2, RB3 types, which to me, and I said this on my show that I recorded earlier today, that's dropping tomorrow. I was talking to Matt Waldman. He's going to be on Late Round Perspectives tomorrow. Oh, nice. But like to me, the fantasy landscape, right, in general dynasty, what have you, there's like 7 RB1s. I mean, this is the same case in redraft, right? Like you get this pocket, and these underdog, like these best ball drafts are very good at recognizing the pocket, right? You get them all going off the board in like the mid-second round, and then there's a big gap until you get to like Travis Etienne and such, right? Yeah. And in dynasty, it's the same thing where you just have this like cluster of like 7 to 8 running backs, you know, can give you that elite production. And then when we say RB2, we generally think like RB13 to RB24, right? That's just how we've defined RB2 historically. But realistically, RB2 is like RB9 to RB40. You know, like any of those guys can realistically give you RB2 numbers, and then maybe like a Rachaad White last year, fall into the right backfield, have a little talent, be a good pass catcher, and give you that RB1 season. I don't think that there's necessarily a ton of like Rachaad Whites in this class, but there are definitely guys who, in the right conditions, will be able to give us those spike seasons, I think.
Yeah. And I mean,
oh,
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, the fact, you know, I keep hearing like smart people saying like this class isn't quite as bad as people are maybe making it out to be. But I think because we're probably not going to see that great of draft capital, and because of this perceived weak class, I think we're going to get incredible deals on a lot of these guys in both best ball drafts and dynasty rookie drafts, where, I mean, they're going to land in ambiguous backfields and they're going to have a legit chance to climb it. And we might get prices that are extremely palatable.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like a lot of the teams that, like, if you look across the league, I think Cincinnati's a really good example of this, where, you know, the Bengals have like, yeah, they could get away with having Zach Moss and Chase Brown this year. I think that is maybe the likely outcome, you know, maybe like a, like 60% chance that something like that happens. But day 3, they could just do what they did last year with Chase Brown and just get another day 3 back. And that day 3 back has a pretty legitimate chance, or some chance, I shouldn't say legitimate, some chance to just be the best back in that backfield, right? And so I think there's a lot of that going on. So like early best ball draft, like big board drafts for me, I've been just pounding guys like Ray Davis and you know, getting like Isaiah Davis I like a lot as well. Kamani Vidal. There's a lot of players out there who I think could give you year 1 production if they're in the right spot. I know that that's like an easy thing to say, but talent still has to drive that to some degree. And I think those guys have enough talent to be able to do that.
Yeah. Well, and it's
I have not heard any of those names. So I just got back from a trip to Disneyland last week, and the only prospect work I'd done prior or have been doing is on the receivers, because I keep hearing the stuff about the rookies, and I'm not drafting a bunch up here in Washington. I just started some slow drafts that I'm super excited about, but I'm not to those late rounds yet. So I haven't had any reason to dig into the running backs. So I was super excited to hear you name a couple names of this, deep group of RB2s you're describing. I was going to ask you a second ago when me and people talked at the same time, who are some of your favorites? I want to know who your running back sleepers are, because I haven't looked at it. You just named 3 names that I'm
take it like a different language.
Those are pretty deep. To give you context, I mean, Ray Davis gets drafted in most drafts, I would say, but Vidal and Isaiah Davis do not regularly get drafted.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, to me, we probably have a little bit too much confidence in the delta between Isaiah Davis to Audric Estime will go a couple rounds ahead of him.
Yeah.
He'll go in the 17th or something, or 18th. And then Isaiah Davis might go undrafted in some of these drafts. To me, there's just not a big enough difference there. I think that, a guy like Estime, who I think is fine, he just doesn't have a great pass catching profile. And that's obviously something that we all should be interested in most when it comes to our running backs in fantasy. But Isaiah Davis is I have an obscene amount of Isaiah Davis in best ball right now, because it doesn't matter.
Pull up his blurb from your draft guide.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can do that.
Okay, I as you talk about him here.
Yeah. So I think that the thing with Davis that's super intriguing is he just really looks like, look at his top comps. It's James Robinson, Tyler Algier. It's these guys who fell into a decent enough spots, these ambiguous backfields in year 1. And then they were able to get some production. And then from a dynasty perspective, those are the guys that you then flip after year 1, right? If you had Tyler Algier, you were flipping him even before, things happened with Bijan Robinson. If you had James Robinson, you were flipping him because he was a day, he went undrafted. And those guys usually don't sustain amazing NFL careers, but for that rookie season, for that 1 year, they can work. Isaiah Davis, he played at South Dakota State. He was behind Pierre Strong for a couple of years. And he dug into Pierre Strong's workload a little bit there, but he had really good production the 2 years after Pierre Strong left. He graded really well from a PFF standpoint. He looked good in reception share, which is one of the metrics that my model looks at. He had a good breakout score, pretty good breakout score, just really his solid size, play all 3 downs. So to me, he's just one of those players where if he goes to a place like Cincinnati on day 3, because he's going to be a day 3 pick, I think he will get drafted. I'd say there's a 90% chance that he gets drafted. If he goes to Cincinnati on day 3, all of a sudden it's okay, Chase Brown has some flaws to his game. Zach Moss has been inconsistent throughout his career. Why not? Why couldn't a guy like Isaiah Davis really emerge, especially during the second half of the year, whenever we really need these guys to emerge for our best ball teams?
Yeah.
I like it. Chris Polk is another UW guy. I know we're going to talk about some UW guys later.
Is he? So, nice.
I mean, as far as your 3 statistical comps, you got 2 productive NFL players and a UW guy, so I'm in.
I think that's what makes it, so different and challenging for drafting right now versus after the NFL draft, where we know after the NFL draft, that draft capital and those depth charts, we're going to know, are you taking on a dead roster spot potentially, a guy who could be a 0 all year? But right now, to your point, JJ, the selling point for drafting a running back is projected draft capital. And after, 5 or 6 of them, there is no guarantees about draft capital. So then how are you going to sort them? It has to be based on talent, because all of these guys getting drafted at the end, it's just who is the guy you feel like if they land in the right spot could actually take advantage of it. Whereas you might be completely off Isaiah Davis if he doesn't land in the right spot or he goes undrafted, right? Then it's the thesis is gone.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's similar to Izzy Abanikanda last year, right? Where, we're pumped about him and he's got this really good size speed profile, pretty good marks across the board. And then he goes to the Jets. And then all of a sudden it's all right, well, now he's at best a handcuff in that situation.
Yeah.
You said, as we're talking about landing spots, you said a bit ago that Dallas at 56 is a good one, and got me thinking about that report that came out recently about them and Ezekiel Elliott are, may be interested in reunion, but nothing actually happened there. And now that we think about that, we look back at that, it's that kind of feels like it was like trying to pretend like they're not obviously going to take a running back with one of their first 2 picks. Would it surprise you? I mean, I kind of wouldn't surprise me if they took Brooks at 24. Like he's from Texas, University of Texas, obviously. But if not 24, 56, they're going to go running back pretty early, right? I mean,
yeah. And they like the flashy picks too, right? Like,
they do.
I actually think the Zeke thing. So like, I think the Zeke thing can work if they get Jonathon Brooks, because again, like Brooks coming off the ACL, I don't know what things are going to look like from a workload perspective, not only during camp in the summer, but then as the season gets going, usually it's like, you can get like, they can start playing around 9 months. And then, at 12 months is when things finally start to pick up and they can produce a little bit better. I'm not a doctor. It's just what I've read and talked to other like people who study that kind of thing. And so like hypothetically, let's say they get Zeke, or they get a body like that, because look at their depth chart right now is trash. It's horrible, right?
Yeah.
Like the worst depth chart in football. And
which is why everyone's like, whoever goes to Dallas,
Like Patriots wide receivers say, "Hold my beer, JJ."
But like if they get Zeke, hypothetically, first 6 weeks of the season, what if Zeke is a pseudo bell cow, and then which like it's not going to be like extremely productive, but I think that he's at least capable of carrying that, right, and shouldering that. And then Brooks is getting sprinkled in a little bit, and then he really has the takeover during the second half of the season. I think the issue with Brooks that I have is not necessarily like, I can understand it from like a ceiling perspective in best ball and like trying to really win the playoff weeks and such, because he's going to hopefully be healthy by that point. I think it's more so like, and there's volatility and ceiling there with Brooks. I think more so from like a dynasty perspective, if he doesn't, the investment in best ball is not massive, right, to get Jonathon Brooks. But
no,
if he doesn't pan out year one because of the injury, even if he's talented, even if all of these things about him and his profile and you feel good about it, you're still going to have some doubt, right? Even if that it was because of the injury as to why he didn't produce. And so then you're in this really weird predicament of, do I just try to sell, or is his value going to drop in dynasty? Like, how's that going to work from year one to year two? So I do think that the ACL should be, part of your like your thinking and thought process with drafting or not drafting Jonathon Brooks. I think without the ACL though, he'd be the clear-cut RB1 in this class, in my opinion.
It's also because people are so fixated on the Cowboy spot, and let's even lump the Chargers in there. Those are two obviously great spots, but like if you put any of these running backs with weak draft capital, say third round draft capital, on non-Cowboys and Chargers spots, like even a guy like Jonathon Brooks, you start to be like, man, there's probably a better running back ahead of him, not as good of an offense, might take a while to get ramped up to speed. Like you could see people turning bearish on him pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing too, and this is something that I've talked about. I made a thread. I was a cool thread guy one day on Twitter, and I made a thread about why it was with wide receivers, but it still applies to running backs, and how in my model, like, because people like Hayden Winks was tweeting about it a little bit, and how like you could just look at draft capital instead of like worrying about a model and just draft off of draft capital at wide receiver, which he's not totally wrong. Like I wouldn't be surprised if draft capital comes close to rookie ADP in terms of like strength, like just being accurate and stuff, like in terms of beating rookie ADP.
Well, rookie ADP is almost driven entirely by draft capital.
Yeah, right. That's what I'm saying. Like realistic, but there's always here's the thing. There's like in a rookie draft, like for dynasty or something like that, there's always random players that don't get the draft capital that the draft community loves, and they don't adjust for it enough, right? And so I do think, like, I wouldn't be surprised if you tested draft capital versus rookie draft ADP, if draft capital was just better at predicting success than rookie draft ADP was. I know I've tested my model against it. I know my model is way better than rookie draft ADP, but I wouldn't be shocked if like draft capital itself was better than that. And so, yeah, you could hypothetically like go down that route and look at draft capital, where I think like a model, like my stuff, or, where I believe other models should be, is that like the best way to describe this is early on in the draft capital matters more to a player's score than late in the draft, right? So if a guy gets drafted 10th overall, a wide receiver, let's say, versus 32nd overall, that's a 22 gap difference, but it's actually a pretty massive difference in terms of like historical hit rate and how much that draft capital matters. Whereas if you look at a 22 spot difference in the 4th round to the 5th round, it's irrelevant. Like it just doesn't matter that much at
Right.
all. And so when you mention the draft capital thing, these guys going like in the third round, like there's even at running back, there's even a little bit of a dip. Not a little bit, a decent dip from round 2 to round 3. And so if some of these running backs do go round 3, I think that people are going to look at the draft board and say, this guy's the RB2 in this class, but he went round 3, right? But they're like, oh, but he's the RB2 in this class. But his standing as the third round running back, mid third round, wherever he goes, versus a guy who goes even in the 5th round, that's not going to be that significant of a thing for me to love that guy so much. Like realistically, a 5th round running back in this class versus a 3rd round running back in this class, from a best ball perspective, you're talking, you're going to probably see like a 6 round gap between those two guys, right? Like realistically. And I if the talent profile is there for the 5th round guy, I'm going to be way more inclined to hit that value as opposed to getting that 3rd round back.
JJ, the guy that I think I've seen the chat mention, and that I've been seeing on Twitter a lot today. There's always like, a popular prospect for like the day or the couple day or whatever. But have you guys seen this Tyrone Tracy guy's been like the popular name the last couple days?
Yes, it puts me on tilt because I had written about this. This isn't like a I need to be first thing. This is just more of a I should have seen this coming thing. With Tracy. Look at his 3rd comp on this list. It's Tony Pollard.
It's Tony Pollard.
This was coming. And the reason Pollard's the comp is because Tracy is a converted wide receiver. And so he had a really kind of similar journey and profile to Pollard. The biggest difference, though, is that he's like 24 and a half years old. Like the dude is not young. And that's somewhat of a problem for him. I don't think he's like bad by any means. I would be pretty surprised if he is like this massive fantasy contributor. Now, his score of 25 in the ZAP model is definitely being driven down by draft capital, right? Because I think whenever I'm pretty sure his input, like I do projected draft capital based on NFL mock draft database whenever I'm doing the pre-draft stuff, and his because of the hype, what you're talking about, his projected draft capital has gone up by like 70 or 80 spots or something over the last like 2 or 3 weeks. So he would look a lot better now than the 25, but it's hard to like buy that heavily into a guy who he has a decent receiving profile. He seems like more so someone that I would want to stash in my dynasty.
He's so old that the Cowboys might draft him to bring along Ezekiel Elliott. That's what you're saying.
Right.
He's the veteran for Zeke.
The weird thing though, and the thing that I'm having trouble with this running back class is that I don't remember the numbers exactly. I talked about it on a show last week, but basically like since 2011, I think from 2011 to 2023, there were 13 running backs drafted or who went to the combine. So this is out of like hundreds and hundreds of running backs. Only 13 of them were over 24 years old at the time of the draft, right? In this class, we have 6. So like we're getting like 50% of what we've seen over the last 12 years in this class in terms of like old guys. I think a lot of that has to do with like transfer rules, NIL, and then obviously the pandemic too.
COVID year,
Yeah, so it's like it's a little bit different, and I don't want to like overstate the age thing because I've been drafting Ray Davis and he's old too. I just think that he has more of like a 3-down skill set than Tyrone Tracy does.
One thing about him that's sort of fascinating is that he tested really pretty well, right? Like I think his explosion stuff and his agility stuff was all like 90th percentile plus.
Yeah, did he do it? Was he a pro day guy?
Why did he blow up today?
No, he ran at the comp. He had a 4.48. So he had a 104 speed score, which is strong. It's good.
But I think his shuttle and his 3-cone and his jumps and all that were even better. Was sort of like what I remember looking at. But again, I just was trying to figure out who this guy was today. That's the extent of my research.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. And by the way, I just looked and I do have him as that 25 score is him being undrafted. So if he goes 170th overall, then all of a sudden he's got a score of 54, which is
now we're talking Isaac Guerrero.
But that gets back to our point. That gets back to our point earlier about this running back class and draft capital in general. When they're all one big group, it's really hard. Like since you've put this together, this is a guy whose profile is shot up, and if he does go in, what did you say, 170? What would that be like?
Yeah, 170 was the random. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, then he's suddenly going to be a 5th round pick. He's suddenly going to look a lot different in the model. So once we get that draft capital in a couple of weeks, it's going to be a lot easier to nail down these running backs. The receivers, I mean, we could definitely talk about, like, the receivers are a little bit less dependent, I feel like, on the draft capital stuff. That still matters, obviously, but like more of a talent-based position, more profile-based. I'm curious, like, some of the receivers that you really dig. I've done most of my work on the earlier receivers, but I've been looking a little bit down the line, and I got a couple that I'm pretty excited about too.
My top rookie wideout rostered on Underdog right now is Jermaine Burton. He to me, it's why he has some off the field stuff, which is why I think people are not talking about him enough. But it's really strange to me that a dude who played for Georgia and then transferred to Alabama is not really getting that much hype, right? Whenever you're talking two of the biggest programs, not the biggest programs, in the country, and he's just not getting that much love for whatever reason. But if you look at what he did, I wrote about this in the page that he's showing right now. But he was second on Georgia in receiving as a sophomore on a team that had a lot of pro caliber running backs: Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, A.D. Mitchell, Darnell Washington. George Pickens played a couple games, but he was hurt. But he finished second on the team in receiving yards. And then he goes and plays at Alabama. And his first year at Alabama wasn't great. And I have a theory too. Like, I haven't dug into this that much because I think it'd just be a hard thing to like study and do. But I have a theory that, like, with all these transfers, I wouldn't be shocked if, like, the initial year when a guy's moving laterally from a program, like going from Georgia to Alabama, or moving up in program, right, from going to like Western Michigan to Alabama or something like that. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if, like, their numbers see a decline in some way, right? Because, like, you're switching schools, you're switching environment, all this new stuff going on. Like, if we were switching schools, not even playing a sport, and just going to class, we might see a decline.
How hard it would be to make friends, JJ.
Yeah, right. Think about all the friends. How difficult it would be. Like you would not be as strong of a partier, I should say. Going from one school to the next. Yeah. But like Burton goes to Alabama. First year, not great. Second year, though, as a senior, really strong, and he's a deep ball guy, or he was, and used that way. Like, he can play all over the field. I really, really think he's an underrated player. One of his top comps is Robert Woods for me, and I was talking to Matt Waldman, like I said, on Late Round Perspectives today. It's going to drop tomorrow, and that was his top comp for him. So it's nice whenever film and analytics are completely meshing and coming to form a player who was a very consistent wide receiver 2-3 throughout his career.
What does this 73.2 score imply for draft capital for him?
Yeah, I think his draft capital was 3rd round whenever I inputted it. And I wouldn't be shocked if he goes higher than that if a team wants to take a chance on some of the off the field stuff. The off the field stuff, it's 85th overall is what the score was all about. But I believe the story with Burton is that he, like, hit a girl after they lost a game or something. Like, whenever a team was rushing the field as like a fan or something, and he, like, hit her. And so he's just got some bad stuff going on there, and that could definitely, like if you guys are watching the draft and you see Jermaine Burton go day 3, that's 100% the reason why, is because the off the field stuff. It's not because he's like a bad football player.
Interesting. Yeah, I read he was one of 3 guys you wrote up as some of the guys you were drafting a bunch on Underdog. You just mentioned that. One of the others was Jalen McMillan. The chat, everyone wants you to convince Gretch on Jalen McMillan because he's not a fan. A Husky homer, not a fan.
I'm not even like that much, not of a fan. I am a little curious where this came from. We've talked about it. I'm not a huge fan, but you had me name my one-word answer for him. I think this is where it came from. I called him unreliable. That was my one-word explanation for McMillan. But I did say recently that I think, or last time we talked about this, I think he probably has higher upside than Polk, which Polk's going ahead of him, and I like Polk quite a bit. But yeah, no, I'm interested in JJ's take on him for sure.
So he was kind of hard to find strong comps for, which is why you get like Kenny Stills to Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? I think the St. Brown one is a real, not super realistic, but like an archetype kind of comp for him where I do think that he's going to mostly be stapled to the slot in the NFL. But I do think he has the ability to play on the outside a little bit too. The reason I like McMillan though is I have this galaxy brain take that the Washington wide receivers are sort of a strong comparison to the USC receivers that we saw like 3 or 4 years ago with Drake London, Michael Pittman, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, where Rome Odunze is Drake London, Jalen Polk is Michael Pittman. That's probably the worst comp of the three. And then because Drake London's actually a comp for Rome Odunze for me. And then Jalen McMillan being the Amon-Ra and playing the slot and such. The thing I love about McMillan is last year he was played hurt for a lot of the year. And so that's when we really saw Polk start to ascend is after, like because of the injury. The year prior, everyone's talking about Rome Odunze, rightfully so, being, top 10 pick in the draft. Go look at Jalen McMillan's production versus Rome Odunze 2 years ago. It was extremely close, like very, very close. And so McMillan, I have a teammate score in the model. So he, Polk, and Rome Odunze all get bumped a little bit because of the teammate score. And that'll be dependent on like where guys get draft, like their draft capital, the individual draft capital. So if Rome Odunze goes top 10, that's going to help Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk from a score perspective. But if he falls for whatever reason, then they wouldn't have as high of a score. But I think that he's a really capable slot guy. And yeah, I mean, the fact that he was able to compete with two very good wide receivers who are Jalen Polk's supposed to go in the second round and, Odunze go in top 10. And the fact that McMillan did what he did 2 years ago with Odunze, in that same offense, I think is pretty telling.
It's a great point. My thing on McMillan when you watch him, and like obviously being a Husky guy, I've watched all the games. It's a little bit like, and he's not going to be this good, but it's a little bit like Will Fuller, where he has some drops issues. He's small. He doesn't necessarily break a lot of tackles and stuff underneath, which was frustrating at times. The national championship game, he had a couple opportunities to make huge plays if he could just break little arm tackles. And like, you just know that when you're a Husky fan, he's not doing it. And it's like, man, it gets wrapped up by one leg, by an arm. And it's like, he's going down. He always goes down on those plays. Yeah. And yet he's still capable of, like you said, an 1,100 yard, 9 touchdown season alongside Odunze in that big year for both of them in 2022. It's not that he can't be good. And that's why I was saying that, like, I think that he could still probably have more upside than Polk, who I really like. Polk's a big bodied X receiver, fun guy to watch, contested catches, breaks tackles after the catch. Like it gets you going. He makes like these like big physical plays. It's like the AJ Brown type profile. Obviously I love these types of receivers. McMillan, you're like, you just always want more. You always like, you should be able to give me more. You shouldn't leave so many plays on the field. You shouldn't drop balls, all that stuff. But throughout Will Fuller's career, I remember always arguing like, yeah, he's still putting up production. Like everyone's always mad that he dropped that touchdown, but he's still like, you get so, yeah. I mean, we all love Will Fuller because he would get open enough that he could drop 2 long touchdowns and still produce. And I think that's where McMillan has a shot to be really good. It's just good route running downfield, like getting into space and then not having to break tackles and that kind of stuff, using his speed and athleticism. I was intrigued by the fact that all 3 of these Husky receivers tested so well. I think all of their RAS scores were really, really high. I was a little surprised by that, honestly.
I think they're good. Yeah, I mean, like I think that like that's why I'm making the Trojans comparison. Like I think they're all pretty legit.
It's crazy now. I feel like the whole thing with the teammate stuff obviously really popped up after, the Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, but I feel like now it just happens all the time. Then we had all the Ohio State guys where it's now become we have a much bigger sample size of these guys and what it means to play with other really dominant players.
Yeah, part of me feels like there's this might ruffle some feathers, but I feel like part of it could just be like people watching those games and then being like having just like an inherent bias because they're seeing those players play so much, and then that because like for instance, whenever I'm looking at all this stuff in my model, it's not necessarily that like a guy who has a score of 85 objectively looks so much better than a guy who has a score of 60. It could just be draft capital that's different, like analytically, right? And so draft capital though then is driven by people who are in front offices that are watching this stuff, that are, grading things a certain way, that are looking at analytics too, to some degree. But I do wonder how much of that is, we could probably go and do some sort of study and look at teammates historically and see if there's like always one bad teammate or something that like shouldn't have been elevated the way that he was elevated in the draft by draft capital, to see if teams are just like artificially sort of pushing them up draft boards because, they're watching Rome Odunze and they're like, oh, this guy's not bad. And then they just aren't watching other guys as carefully or closely. It's just a loose take. It's just something that I've thought about before.
I was talking to Dwayne the other day because he had been working on his wide receiver supermodel, and he ended up going with, and I hope I'm not bastardizing exactly how he did it, but doing a quality of program score that he found to be kind of more predictive of the teammate score element, and just like, the Ohio States, these schools that continually produce the big time wide receivers, Alabama, obviously Georgia, that ended up helping fine tune the model from the teammate score angle.
Yeah, that's one of the big things that I changed in my model this year is that, so, we've all used breakout age for years. There's nothing wrong with breakout age, like it gets signal. But I have some issues with like dominator rating. I don't think that it's like a flawless metric and statistic, which, it's not bad, but I think that like yards per team pass attempt is a better metric than dominator, for instance, just by the stuff that I've tested. And so I created breakout score for both running backs and wide receivers. Running back, I use total yards per team play for it, but with wide receiver, it's yards per team pass attempt. And instead of looking at like breakout age in a binary way, it's like, oh, this guy broke out or he didn't this year, it looks at a ton of different thresholds for these guys to try to hit at a certain age in yards per team pass attempt. And so, I think, and then on top of that, it adjusts for games played, but also program strength. And that's one of the things that I think has been a blind spot to some degree with breakout age and the way that we evaluate these guys analytically. And look, I'm guilty of it too. I'm not like throwing anyone under the bus here. For instance, Jaden Reed in my model last year had an elite, and it worked out for him, thankfully, but he had an elite breakout score, or breakout age rather, because he played at Western Michigan his freshman year before transferring to Michigan State. And he broke out that first year at Western Michigan while playing alongside D. Eskridge. And then, Sky Moore got there after Jaden Reed left, and Jaden Reed had better numbers than Sky Moore did. And there were reasons to give that some context and say, Jaden Reed might be pretty good. But regardless, in the model now, I mean, he looks still pretty good in the model, in the revised model, but like his breakout score is totally different because every season, in terms of yards per team pass attempt, is being adjusted for program strength. So him playing at Western Michigan does not get nearly enough, as much love as if he were to do that at Michigan State after he had transferred. So program strength is huge, man. Like there are a lot of times people are looking at like yards per team pass attempt charts and they're like, oh, this guy did this as a junior. It's like, okay, but he played at like some random small school that no one knows. It's like a lot of guys can do that. All of the smaller school guys, or like the majority of small school guys that go to the NFL Combine, have absurd market share numbers because they played against worse competition with worse competition, right? And so program strength is definitely something that people need to factor in a little bit more.
So I got a great name to talk about for this because it's a guy that is one of my favorite wide receiver sleepers from – I like to look at the per route run stuff, targets per route run. I have my weighted targets per route run that brings in some air yards. He didn't run a ton of routes his first few years. So the guy is Jacob Cowing, who obviously I'm sure you guys are aware of, but he started at UTEP. As a true freshman, ran about 250 routes, which is not a ton, but had a 26.5% targets per route run, which is a really high number for a true freshman. And then as a sophomore, only 235 routes, not very many, less than his first year. His targets per route run was 31.9% right away as a sophomore. Third year, 31.2%. He gets his routes up a little bit, but still only 356. Those are the 3 years he played at UTEP. So he puts up these gaudy numbers like you're talking about. And his ADOT in all 3 years was at least 14.8. So he's drawing all these these targets per route at really deep ADOT. So when I look at this weighted targets per route run that I was just referencing, his sophomore and junior year, it's fucking insane how high it is. Like, I don't think I've seen a number this high. And then these last 2 seasons, he transferred to Arizona, and he has a thing going for him there where it's not an elite program, but they have a receiver who's still there. I don't know how to say his first name. I think it's Tetroya or something, Tetroya McMillan. I looked into him a little bit because my Huskies, again, everything that I know about anything goes back to the Huskies. My Huskies, after losing Kalen DeBoer, hired Arizona's coach. And so there was a rumor that their QB and this McMillan receiver, Cowing is going pro. He's played 5 years of college. He's an older guy. The other big thing about him is he's a 168 weight guy. I love that you have Tank Dell as a comp here because I was going to ask you a little bit about that. He had the high ADOT while at UTEP. But I was looking at the QB and the other receiver as maybe transfer guys for UW. But when you watch the QB's highlights, you see a lot of stuff from Cowing, who, by the way, even at Arizona with this McMillan guy there, who the McMillan receiver looks really good. And it is supposed to be one of the top receivers in next year's class. Cowing still had a 25+% targets per out run both years in Arizona, but at an older age, and he was less efficient and at a lower ADOT. They put him into more of like a slot role. He was good there, but not as good as at UTEP. But I'm still intrigued because the numbers were so good at UTEP early in his career. The weight is obviously a concern, but he tested really fast too. I think he ran a 4.38 at the combine. So I'm curious if he's somebody that you've looked at all, because I'm like kind of going back and forth with him. The small size is a big concern, but I was telling myself actually that maybe he could be like this year's Tank Dell if he lands in the right spot.
Yeah, I think that if there is a guy that's Tank Dell, it's him. If you look at his, so again, yards per team pass attempts is what breakout score is looking at. His breakout score is like 74, 75, something around that range, which it's out of 100. Give you an idea, Roma Dunze is at 86. Xavier Worthy's at 96. Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. at 98, 99, like around that. So like it's above average, like well above average. But that's all while having one of his seasons. I think it was his third year at UTEP. He had a 3.71 yards per team pass attempt rate, which is bonkers. That's a crazy, crazy number. But again, I adjust those numbers based on program. And so the adjustment makes that look like a 2.6 total or yards per team pass attempt rate. So again, that's not that bad. Like that's not a bad number. That's worse though than like with the adjustment that Washington got for Roma Dunze. That's a worse number than what Roma Dunze had, for instance, despite that being 3.71, right? Despite it being a lot greater. So that's sort of like the way that, like, that's been the biggest change for me, is looking at these individual seasons and adjusting those individual seasons for the program, as opposed to, you know, like, I think when you're looking at this stuff analytically, Jaden Reed's, again, just going back to that example, it's like a perfect example. Cause like, you could be like, oh, he had an 18.7 breakout age and, oh, he went to Michigan State. And then you combine these two things. You're like, this guy's a freaking monster, right? Like, yeah, in a Big Ten school, he broke out before he was 19. This is fantastic. Well, he broke out whenever he was playing at Western Michigan. And so it's similar with a situation like this, where, you know, last year, you know, I might have looked at him a little bit different, Cowing a little bit different. But now I'm looking at it, I think, a little bit more objectively with the adjustments being made.
I love that you're doing it individual years, because I mean, like ultimately you're like, yeah, he had a great season, but like, how great of a year would that have been at a normal school as opposed to at UTEP? And like, that's probably the way to think about it. Like, he wouldn't have put up as big of numbers. Where would he have actually landed with his numbers, right? Like at an average school. And so we adjust for that. I think that makes sense.
Exactly. And like a lot of these, like there's the dude from Holy Cross coming out, Jalen Croker, I think his last name is. I haven't done, you know, I wrote this like a month and a half ago, so I don't even remember like all the lower tiered guys. But you know, there's players that are going to like Coker, for instance, is coming from Holy Cross, and he had a 4.11 yards per team pass attempt rate. But Holy Cross basically cuts that in half, right? The fact that he went to Holy Cross, like that's the equivalent of a 2 point whatever it is in the like a 2.3 yards per team pass attempt rate, which is still okay. But there's no reason we should be giving a guy a 4.11 yards per team pass attempt rate at Holy Cross and saying that's better than a guy who had a 3.5 rate at Alabama. It doesn't make any sense to do that, right? And so you'll see that a lot. And the weird thing too, and this might just be, people might be curious about this, but I don't actually have any adjustments for running backs. I only have adjustments for wide receivers, and I tested it. And the reason I think for this is that draft capital probably captures it better at running back than it does at wide receiver. Like if you look historically at small school running backs to get drafted round 1, I mean, it doesn't happen in round 1, but like day 2, right? Round 2 and 3, there are actually a lot of hits of guys that came from non-Power 5 schools. David Johnson, Kareem Hunt. Last year we had Tajay Spears, who might be good. I mean, there's guys who, I guess he was technically day 3 because he was early day 3, but like there's not that much. And a lot of that has to just do with the fact that running backs can just be athletic or whatever and still be okay in football and in fantasy football and stuff. But there's no adjustments being made at running back, but there's a ton of adjustments being made at wide receiver.
Yeah. That makes
tell
sense.
me the defenses that a wide receiver faces at Holy Cross are different than at Alabama.
Right. Yeah.
The quarterback.
Yeah.
That's like the Michael Jordan played against accountants. Like, I mean, at Holy Cross, they're playing against like future priests. Like, I mean,
some of the stuff. Yeah, I love. Yeah, I love like looking at like the opponents of these guys too, like who they play. Like, there's schools that no one's ever heard of. Like we've heard of Holy Cross partially because wasn't it like referenced all the time in like the movie Rudy and stuff? Like it was like
Bill Simmons went there and would never stop talking about it. Yeah,
yeah. But it's funny though because like Coker, his top comp is Justin Watson. Like you're getting like that kind of player. But like we did that with guys like Watson in the past where we're like, sure, throw the 5th round dart on this guy in rookie drafts, whatever. Like put him on your taxi. It's not a big deal. But at the same time,
there's other dudes from these small schools that I can't even remember their names, but there were some that had some ridiculous numbers. I remember like 3, 4, 5 years ago, at least I can't remember who the dude is, but like he had obscene numbers and like he just never was anything. I mean,
yeah, it happens.
Like Watson is probably a success story.
Yes, he's a good. So like people see Jalen Coker's top comp being Justin Watson, and they're like, oh, that sucks. It's like, no, actually, it's kind of good.
Wow.
It's actually great. Yeah.
I also just want to make sure the moment didn't fully pass by that the only way Sky Moore is now mentioned on this show, outside of just being a complete joke, is in an anecdote about D. Eskridge at Western Kentucky. That's how sad it is for Sky Moore to get pulled up on this show.
It's been rough. JJ, the other guy we got to talk about that's a later round guy. I'm pretty sure you wrote him up in your newsletter. It was like it was probably 2 weeks ago now because I remember reading it, and it was I think before I went on my trip where you did some of your favorite sleeper receivers, a couple of them, and I think Burton was on the list. But Javon Baker from Central Florida, would you have had him on that list?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, he was on there because he's an Alabama guy, transferred to Central Florida. Didn't see much at Alabama, but that's also, he's playing with like Devontae Smith, Jamison Williams and stuff. So he didn't do much at Alabama. And then he gets to Central Florida, which, by the way, do not send a newsletter or put together content where you're writing out Central Florida because the Knight alumnus will come after you and tell you that you only say UCF. You do not say Central Florida. Yeah, I had 2 separate emails from people after I had sent that out. I guess they're alums, and they were mad at me for actually saying.
What does it stand for?
Well, it stands for that, but apparently you can't say that. I don't understand. I get maybe it's similar to like because I went to Pitt, right? And if someone says like you Pitt, I'm like, no, it's Pitt. Like you don't have to do. I don't know, but I thought it was being formal and like nice to them. But
I always write. I have a habit of writing San Fran, and I've gotten some people from the Bay Area. They get pissed. They're like, it's San Francisco or it's SF. You don't call us San Fran. And I'm like, all right, man. Like I'm gonna keep doing it because that's how I've always called it.
Yeah,
I can't stop.
I will say, I get a little offended when people call like a professional sports team in Pittsburgh. I mean, I don't live in Pittsburgh anymore, but I grew up there. When they call a professional team in Pittsburgh like Pitt, and they say Pitt for that, like Pitt is the school in Pittsburgh, right? And then Pittsburgh, any of the sports teams are that. Anyway, Javon Baker. He transferred.
That's reasonable. That people should not be calling it like the sports.
I think so too.
Pitt. Yeah, that's always been weird.
And please call him JB. For God's sake.
But yeah, like he was good whenever he went to Central Florida, and I think that he's just a sort of complete receiver. I think his, again, this is one of those situations where you look at the comps and you're like, like that's but like Alan Hearns had an actual like 14 plus PPR point per game season. Rashard Matthews had a moment in the NFL.
He was kind of sick for a minute.
Yeah. I think Michael Gallup would have had a much better career without the injury, right? Like I don't think those comps are bad at all for Javon Baker. I think they're actually pretty good for a guy who's at the time, I think his projected draft capital has risen too. That's the other thing too. Like when like, I don't know how much best ball drafters are using a place like NFL Mock Draft Database, but anecdotally, the last 2 years, because I've done this is my third iteration of the guide, and the first 2 years that I did it, it was really helpful in knowing when a player was going to be drafted higher than what the fantasy market thought. Like Jaden Reed's a pretty good example of that. Like I was high on Reed last year, but part of that too was like I knew that other people or that these mocks were saying what they were saying. He was supposed to go in like the third, he went in the second, but he was an afterthought in the fantasy space, right? Javon Baker is kind of there as an afterthought. I mean, he's rising maybe a little bit in ADP, but you can get him really late right now. And I just think he's a complete receiver who, if a team, I could easily see him if he goes to like a team with like a flat wide receiver depth chart with just like good, not great players, he could emerge as their top wideout. Like he can play anywhere on the field.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been using Mock Draft Database too, especially with the running backs. Cause I remember I had like, kind of, I guess it's a little counter to your stuff. No, I think you talking about at the very end of drafts were prioritizing talent. For me, I was trying to figure out like ranking these guys in like the rounds 13 through 18. And I was like, I just want to sort them based on who has the highest projected mock draft database thing. Like, it's like at that point, like none of these talent profiles are jumping off the page. Just give me the one who's moving up in the mock drafts, basically.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Javon Baker, definitely a guy I've taken some stabs on. And it is interesting to think, I guess I want to get your take because you were talking about some of these guys producing against low level competition. I mean, Ladd McConkey, we talked about him last week with Sean, and he is such a fascinating guy. All the film guys love him, tests really well, but then has this really poor or unique production profile. Like, where are you falling on the McConkey riddle?
I'm more in on him than out, actually. I have him, I think, at wide receiver 6 right now in the class. Like I like him more than Troy Franklin, for instance. Like I think that there are things to his profile that are pretty intriguing. So look, I've never seen. I looked at the database, my prospect database too, but I use yards per team pass attempt. Like I said, yards per team pass attempt has a really strong correlation. I'm talking like 80 to 85% correlation to yards per route run when you're looking at like max season stuff, right? Yards per route run, obviously predictive as well. And it's really strange though, because McConkey's best season in yards per route run is 3.26. And that's the 6th highest in this year's class. But of the players who came in higher, so the 5 guys who were higher than McConkey in yards per route run, all of their best season yards per team pass attempt rates were above 3.3. Ladd McConkey's was at 1.83. So basically we have this incredibly strange dichotomy of horrible yards per team pass attempt rate, great yards per route run rate. What the heck's going on? We actually saw this last year with Puka Nacua. And the reason was BYU, for whatever reason, didn't use Nacua as an every down player. Like he would come off the field, which is bonkers to think about today. McConkey actually was 5th on Georgia last year in routes run. So whether that was he had some injuries that he struggled and tried to play through. Georgia, though, also from a game script perspective, we know that they're good. They're leading. They're not going to throw these guys on the field to run random routes that don't matter towards the end of games. And so, yeah, McConkey just has this really, really strange profile. But when you sort of look at these, like, the tertiary stuff and like the non-production related things, there's a lot to like. Like film guys love him, right? Draft capital is going to be there for him. And then he has a good teammate score too. Like programs there, the competition has been there for him throughout his collegiate career. And I think that he can play inside outside too, McConkey. So, I'm leaning more on like the model doesn't hate him. He has a score of like 87 right now. Like it's not like the model doesn't like him. It's just that there are definitely, like, I can understand why people are a little bit hesitant with McConkey. if I were to just take a step back, this wide receiver class is being touted as like as good as the 2014 class, right? The class that had like OBJ and like just Mike Evans, absurd Brandon Cooks, just crazy good players. I don't think it's that good analytically. Like I did a study and I looked at breakout scores for guys who are projected to go in the first 2 rounds of this draft and then what we've seen historically. And the breakout scores for the guys that are going this year are some of the worst that we've ever seen over the last 12 years. Like it's just that draft capital is driving this a little bit. And I think breakout scores are a little bit lower for these guys because of the pandemic and because of the way things kind of unfolded over the last handful of years in college. But I do think that the wide receiver class is probably a little bit overrated. And so what I'm getting at is the reason I have McConkey where I have him is because I think you can poke holes in a lot of these profiles, right? Like after like probably the top 3 and maybe you can throw aside, like I have Brian Thomas at 4, Xavier Worthy at 5, and then I get into Ladd McConkey. I just think that after like even Worthy, you could throw or poke holes in his profile.
You
but
can
like,
poke holes in Thomas.
Right, exactly. And you could even, if you wanted to, poke holes into Odunze's to some degree. Like,
sure.
like I just think
I mean, not on this show, but you could somewhat.
Right. But yeah, like I think that there's just a flatness to the wide receiver group once you get outside of those like truly elite guys.
Yeah. And I think it will be fascinating to that same point of how these guys ultimately get ordered in dynasty and best ball drafts. And it will be driven by landing spot way more than draft capital, right? Because everyone's kind of shrugging their shoulders. How do you order, wide receiver 6 through 13, 14 anyways? Some of these guys are going to bank an incredible spot at the back end of round 1, and some of them might go to Carolina. And it's like, we know which one is going to go ahead in that situation.
Yeah.
So
I would imagine people are going to let landing spot dictate a lot. I would.
Another dude that I wanted to ask you about, and I'm doing some weird stuff in my head right now with their names because that's funny because Ladd McConkey's whole thing was that he's not just the white slot receiver, but Luke McCaffrey. We got another L mix something. It's like a very similar name and whatever, but he is like a clear slot receiver, and he's Christian McCaffrey's brother. Played quarterback for 3 years, transferred, then like played wide receiver the last couple of years, and was really pretty good, and then tested incredibly well in like the agility stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I'm wondering what you think about him because he didn't really play wide receiver until 2 years ago, his 4th year of college. I'm kind of intrigued for similar reasons that you said. That, like, I mean, I feel like he could play a role, and like it's not that deep of a class. And he's one of these guys where I'm like, there's production there. There's the right skill set for him to play a role if he gets a decent, draft cap. I mean, I don't even know that he needs huge draft capital because slot receivers don't necessarily like. I mean, Amon-Ra famously, right, like a 4th round pick. Teams don't usually jump out of their seats for slot guys necessarily. If he goes by like the 4th round to a team that like maybe will run him out there in the slot a little bit, I mean, is he interesting at all?
Yeah, for sure. And he's only played 2 years of wide receiver, and in those 2 years, he had yards per team pass attempt rates of 2.12 and 2.30. Now, again, some adjustments need to be made because he went to Rice. So take that with a grain of salt. But I think he's going to at least start as a slot guy. But there's intrigue in the fact that he hasn't been playing wide receiver that long, and he's also. If we want to be a little takey here, he's a McCaffrey, right? Like,
yeah, let's do it.
What gave you that idea?
His dad was an NFL receiver. His brother's the 101. I mean, I'm in.
Like, can we just be honest a little bit? Like the crazy thing though, I actually sent this text to one of my best friends who's really into like dynasty and prospecting and stuff like that. And I was doing my guide, and I got to Brendan Rice, right, Jerry Rice's son in the class. And I was like, my text to him was, imagine being the son of the greatest wide receiver of all time and being this bad. like I'm just not like that big of a Brendan Rice guy. But I don't feel that clearly. Don't clip that because the last time I said something like that, he ended up being one of the best wide receivers in the league. With like Luke McCaffrey. I mean, sure, there's intrigue. Another guy that's sort of like McCaffrey is Isaiah Williams from Illinois, who I mean, we're getting deep talking about Isaiah Williams, man. I mean,
that's what we're doing.
Good.
Some super deep stuff. But his top comp for me was Demario Douglas, Isaiah Williams, where he's an athlete. He played quarterback. He had pretty good production too. He got his yards per team pass attempt rate all the way up to 2.54 this past year. And that's again after like coming in as playing quarterback a little bit. So yeah, there we go. Yeah, there's
Producer Nick, I already got the timestamp there.
Look, I don't actually think Brendan Rice. This is all hyperbole, okay, guys? It's hyperbole.
This part isn't included in the clip. Sorry,
it's hyperbole. But yeah, like Isaiah Williams, he's got Richie James also as a comp. Which again, like we're talking a guy that's looking maybe to go undrafted, like maybe a 7th round pick. But he did comp really closely to some fairly productive slot guys, in the league. And it's just another situation where you get a guy who played quarterback and then he played a little bit of wide receiver, and guys who can do that. It's impressive, right? Like they're athletes. Like they can make them. What if there's more of a ceiling there? What if there's more to come with those kinds of profiles?
And to your point of like the comps that people don't get excited about, but are actually good comps, like Demario Douglas is another one. It's like that guy had no hype, landed in a situation where he got on the field, produced with that opportunity, and now finds himself on one of the weakest depth charts in the league, if not the weakest, with a quarterback upgrade coming. Right. Like that is like a best case scenario for some of these guys.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I've actually
some guys. I'm looking at the guide around Isaiah Williams. You got some guys with Zap scores that are like 5.2 down here. Like it's not.
Devaughn Vele.
Would you included him in this, or you just like I just need to go to bed, but I gotta get Devaughn in here, man.
The last like handful of guys that I have to write up, especially like at least at wide receiver, like Xavier Weaver, who was right above Vele, like he had like some intriguing points to his profile and whatnot. Vele, I think he went. Oh no, he went on a religious mission trip. Okay.
Read this third paragraph. He's a year and a half older than
26 and a half.
As Justin Jefferson today, not when Jefferson entered the league.
Yeah, he's 26 and a half. He's almost 26 and a half by the time the draft rolls around. It's like he's like a year and a half older than any other wide receiver in my database coming out. But he apparently
paid actor for East Coast dads. I don't even believe he's right.
You know what I should do is send him.
He's not going to be able to play in any of the night games. It's going to be too late for him to play in the second half of any night.
You got to bench him in your fantasy team whenever they're playing primetime games. But yeah, like he's old. He's old as shit.
He's old.
It's just very hard to back a guy who's 26 and a half. But like, he seems like a good dude. He went on a mission trip out of high school.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he's a better person than we are.
Seems like a good human being. We got that going for him.
JJ, I could also tell it was super late at night when you did this one because you just brutaled the spelling of Benjamin Victor here.
Yeah, I was just mashing my keyboard.
What is your cutoff?
That looks right.
Why did you say I have to include a guy with a 5.2 Zap score?
I made the decision 2 years ago when I did the guide and started doing the guide is that I just put everyone who got invited to the combine because like I wanted like a sample, like a consistent sample of players to put in this thing. And
but
to have
he was invited as the chaplain, JJ, not to actually do anything.
This guy's statistical comps are made up. Jake Wieneke? What was that third name? That's a fake name.
That's honestly some of the best parts of this is when you get the comp and then you have to Google the comp to make sure that you have it right in your database because you've never heard of the guy before.
That's incredible. Yeah.
I've heard of Chris Winkie. That was a quarterback way back in the day.
Who was also a notoriously old prospect.
That's right.
Yeah. Maybe this is just a cousin of his, and it's like in his lineage they have to be old prospects.
Incredible. Well, that's how you know the draft guide is ultimately comprehensive when you got Devaughn Vele in there.
You know what we gotta bug you about too before we let you go real quick is if there's any interesting tight ends because I don't I don't know of any after Brock Bowers. The Jatavian Sanders guy from Texas, it looks pretty interesting, right? But is there any like if he gets round 3 or round 4 capital, like, ooh, this guy's pretty interesting, or not really?
I don't think the class is like last year, because I developed the tight end model last year. I have it that I'm going to publish in the post draft version of the guide, just as like a table instead of doing like the profiles and stuff. But I mean, I have the score, like the projected scores and stuff right now, because I know which guys are. And instead of looking at the guys who go to the combine, the tight end model is only players who are drafted. So I'm also waiting to see who gets drafted. But based on NFL mock draft database, right now the model actually likes Theo Johnson as the tight end 2, the guy from Penn State. Who's just
wow, that's spicy.
Athlete. Yeah, and so his numbers aren't that great from like it looks at yards per route run as the main production metric, and he wasn't that great there, but he's such a beast athletically that he just scored better because of that. And his projected draft capital rose as well after the combine because he destroyed the combine. The other one that I'm probably more intrigued by, who's literally right next to him, like there's a score, he has a score of 87 and Theo Johnson has a score of 87.3. So it's literally the same basically. Jaheim Bell out of Florida State, who I would say is more of, remember when Brevin Jordan came out and we were really intrigued by him because he was more of like an H-back type and like could just potentially see lower A dot looks, but be really good after the catch and see maybe a lot of a high target share. Hasn't totally worked out for him, but that's sort of what we're looking at, I think, with a Jaheim Bell. Like if that can work out, maybe like an Aaron Hernandez type player in a certain scheme. He's smaller. That's the main reason. He's 6'2", 241, which is 6'2" is pretty tiny for a tight end, right? But he's another one that I'm intrigued by. Jatavian Sanders is fine. I think that he might end up being the tight end 2 from a draft capital standpoint, but oddly enough, draft capital matters least at tight end in the model than it does at running back and wide receiver in those models. So, right now he's at a score of 80. So he's fairly close to those guys. But he didn't score that. He ran a 4.69 40 and speed score, not even height adjusted, but just regular speed score. Gets a pretty decent amount of signal in the model. And so because his wasn't like, it was like 101, which is not bad, but it's not like amazing for a tight end. I'd rather them be like over the 105 into the 110 mark. Because of that, he got dinged a little bit in the model.
Yeah. It's a bummer we don't have a deeper tight end class last year, especially coming off of last year. That was just so fun.
Last year was incredible. Yeah.
Can't have it all.
Yeah.
We got enough young tight ends though to just from last year to just keep us afloat for a while here in this transition for fantasy. It's pretty sweet.
Although I will say, Gretchen, now that you're doing some drafts in volume, man, I mean, I've been going so many like double elite tight end because like after pick 110, 120, it is bad at tight end.
That's what I keep hearing.
Last year, he got Gerald Everett, and I'm not saying he was some guy, but he was like, this is the starting tight end on the Chargers. And like, he was like a 15th round pick. Like that doesn't exist in these early drafts.
And I have like many 4 tight end build teams. If I get screwed at tight end, it's just like you're crossing your fingers that Mike Gesicki somehow revives his career in Cincinnati.
So based on that take, and Sean and I recorded a big bananas today, but like one of my big takes in the early going of doing these drafts is the early tight ends are way too cheap. Like because Kelsey used to be a first round pick for a good reason, but right now we have Laporta in the 3rd round, we have Kelsey in the 4th, you have McBride going in the early 5th, and I've made the case on the show that I think McBride should be arguably the tight end 1, right up there with Laporta. Yeah. But like, I think those guys could be like 2nd round picks. I mean, if we're talking about this being such a scarce position right now, and you want to get access to those tight ends, I mean, once I get into those mid rounds, I want to take every tight end. I'm like, I want all these dudes in round 4, round 5, round 6. The opportunity cost isn't horrible. There's some good receivers in those ranges, but
yeah.
I don't know why you wouldn't be taking those. I mean,
I have a ton of McBride.
Yeah.
He's fun.
It's just, I mean,
price.
It's hard not to click them. Just as if you've been drafting on Underdog, for multiple years, we used to have to pay back in my day, 2nd and 3rd round prices for these guys, and now I'm like, these guys are here in the 5th round every single time.
It's crazy. Dalton Kincaid, Stephon Diggs got traded. I can get Dalton Kincaid in the 7th round. All right, Or whatever it is, 6th round, wherever he's going. Maybe it's 5th round. I don't have the exact.
Yeah, the wideouts in that range too dry up so fast because people are drafting wideouts so early, and then running back. I mean, it's just the underdog market right now is wild. With like you're staring at Zamir White or whatever, who has a chance to be at least a 3-down back, right? Like there's that opportunity, and you're staring at him at RB30 or whatever his ADP is versus like the wide receiver 60 sometimes in draft.
Yeah,
right. Just absolutely wild. Like people are sick.
Yeah, welcome. We are.
We're trying to figure out who did this, B.
Yeah,
yeah, seriously.
Well, for people, I mean, you've been teasing it. You're going to become a best ball bro this summer.
That's right.
Right, JJ?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, it will be. It will be happening. We'll definitely have a lot more content, a lot more stuff around best ball after the draft is over. So I'll probably take like a week to breathe a little bit once you know the marathon stuff is done with the NFL draft. But yeah, man, it's gonna be. I mean, I've been probably like 70 to 75 big board drafts deep right now.
Oh wow. Okay, you are best.
I went
ball
pretty
bro
hard.
right now.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Love it. Yeah, we'll have to get you back on later in the summer. We'll do a draft. It'll be fun.
Yeah, man, for sure.
Well, thank you again for coming on. I am going to drop the link to the draft guide in the show notes, and if people subscribe, they can get the version we were looking at tonight, and then an update will hit their inbox shortly after the NFL draft.
Yes. I mean, hopefully it
literally the night of day 3 is what you told us.
The night of day 3. That's what I've been doing the last couple of years, and it's worked. But then there's like updates where I like realize something, and then people get like 6 versions of it by the time Tuesday hits, so that could happen too. But I'll try to get at least an initial set of rankings out and stuff that Saturday night, and then hate myself Sunday morning running a 10K, and then hopefully get my stuff together Sunday afternoon and be able to relax.
Yeah, like if you accidentally call BYU Briggy Youngs in the guide, and then you have to go and update it because everyone's upset. Yeah,
I actually all of the schools are written out in the guide, as you guys probably saw with the screen shares. I really might for Central Florida just put UCF in the update whenever I republish it.
Yeah, you need to tilt them more. Gretch, anything else you got going on this week?
Good stuff with bananas. I'm working on a post over at Stealing Signals, writing up some of my initial thoughts on the big board drafts that I'm doing as well, which I kind of just tease a little bit of the tight end thing. A couple other things that I thought were interesting in the first couple rounds that, we'll have that written up probably tomorrow. So, yeah.
Awesome. For me, I dropped a video on the Deposit Kingdom channel today. Fun video looking at the most polarizing players in fantasy. I compared 3 different ranking sets. So ETR, Pat's at Legendary Upsides, and Sean's at RotoViz, and found the biggest like standard deviations both between their ranking sets and ADP. And so that was a fun exercise, and actually unearthed a couple guys that were values, some guys that were big fades, and then just some controversy there, and then spliced in some clips of those various rankers talking about it. So check that out on the Deposit Kingdom if you guys get a chance. And Gretchen and I will be back next week. We'll have a guest. We'll have to touch base on that. And yeah, thank you guys all for hanging out tonight, and thank you to JJ for joining us. We'll see you guys next time on Ship Chasing. Peace.